all of this is so much more fun. So it's
Agree.
worth the work of doing your rocks and taking a couple hits, running those level 10 meetings, making sure they're done. They start on time, end on time, and they're at the same time of the week every week, and that you run that agenda. Doing all that work really does pay off when you start asking those questions and executing. So that's what EOS is all about.
We're talking about how someone who's self-implementing EOS can get started and feel comfortable that they're truly running the foundational tools of EOS and they're doing enough to be able to say, yeah, we run on EOS. Where does someone actually start to double click on that more? Do they need to go fill in the vision component first? Do they begin? What I see a lot of people do is let's start running level 10s. And they'll go from level 10 to defining some rocks, and then they'll go think about vision. Is there an order of operations you think you really ought to go through? Should they be following even like what the focus days and vision building days, should they be following that cadence of we're going to do these steps?
I would work on rocks, setting rocks, and the scorecard and the meeting pulse, the level 10 meeting pulse. Do those for a few months before well, a couple months before, at least a couple months before you start building your plan, your VTO. It's very hard for a lot of analytical type folks to start without a plan. Very hard for them. Like, how do we know how we're going to execute if we don't have a plan? But that's part of the unique genius of the process. Everybody will agree to go along to get along and answer the questions in the VTO if you bring them all in a room and say, let's answer these questions.
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually work together, fight together, IDS and solve issues together, maybe even get a coach to call you out on things. If you work together for a few months, a couple months, and then start asking those questions, you're going to get better answers and you're going to get better alignment, because ultimately EOS helps you focus. So you don't have to spend energy doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get the right answers, the very best answers that are focused, gets everybody aligned 100% on where you're going and how you're going to get there, you're going to go further faster with less energy. But if you just get everybody in a room and say, we've got 4 hours, 90 minutes, 8 hours, doesn't matter how much time, we've got this much time to answer those questions, go. Without that experience and background of fighting together, you are not going to answer those questions right. Or it'll be all one person's answers, which means not everybody's bought in, which means you're only working on one cylinder.
So the themes I'm hearing there are you have to get that visibility in place. What are our priorities? What are our issues? And then get that rhythm in place of meeting on a regular every week, running a level 10. How are we performing on these? And that starts to surface more of the issues and create more clarity because you're in there in the trenches, like feeling the different pains.
Yeah.
And then that helps feed your overall vision and planning. Is that
Yeah.
what I'm hearing?
Feeds it massively. Yeah. Imagine you setting your core values in a new company and people are at it's hard to find great people.
Mm-hmm.
With EOS, you hire and fire based on those core values.
Yep.
That's a big commitment. So are you going to just one day decide with some people who you've never done this before, can we just set our core values in a way that tomorrow we'll fire based on it or hire based on it? That's a tall order. So you better have some background work. The background work is issue solving together and following a process and a system and believing in it and maybe having some wins and losses together. You go through that journey together and now you say that now we're going to do this. Suddenly you're in a better position to say, I don't know if that's a core value. Maybe it's more like this. And that's where the real work gets done. That's where the real foundation is set so that you can stay focused.
I really like that because it puts you right into let's get these rhythms moving. That's going to help identify who's committed.
Yeah.
That's going to help. If you're doing it now intentionally, you can see where are the friction points really versus just trying to remember and look back. You're actually experiencing it and you can observe as you go through it. That sounds like a great approach. The two items I took down there, going ahead and setting the rocks, and then the issue solving track, I think are two areas I hear a lot of questions about. How do you go about setting those rocks? You're not doing the 1 year goals yet, if I hear you correctly. Is that?
Yeah, and in part of the EOS proven process, we first set rocks before we even set our annual goal, because the annual plan is a part of it's one of the questions in the VTL. As I was saying, hey, don't even ask that question until you've done a bit of work together. So you come together and you just basically say, what are all the things we need to do in the next 90 days? And you get everybody to answer. They'll give you many answers.
They'll
My
give you a lot
experience,
of
20 or 30, 40. You just say, even the next 90 days, what are the most important things? The most important things are usually numerous. But then we ask the big question, for the entire company, what are the three? Let's get that down to 3 to 7. Yeah, there may be things that this department needs to do, an individual needs to do, but what must this company achieve, do or die to hit its, revenue marks or whatever it needs to do. So we discuss and debate, or as some of my clients call it, aggressive fellowship. We go through aggressive fellowship to a point where we get it down to 3 to 7. Sometimes we look at that list and it's hard because you just want it all. Sometimes they combine things and that turns into a discussion. Sometimes I just ask them, hey, where do your eyes go? What's something you can't let go of? What has to be done? But in the discussion, sometimes we find that a lot of the things there can wait. It may, as painful as it is, we can't do this in the next 90 days. We can do it in the next 90 days. And so through what I'm describing is really awkward for people. It's uncomfortable, but it's growth. It's growth in them going from being reactive to just whatever's happening to them to being able to predict what's going to happen next. And so when I ask you, what's the most important thing? What I'm really saying is, in 90 days, where do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And they want everything. But you're only going to be able to handle a few things. So which few things must we have? So we get it down to 3 to 7.
I like that because it forces the commitment, and this is ongoing. It's not like you set those typically and everything just goes fine. There's continual temptation to add. We need to work on more. We need to work on more. I know our team feels it. I know pretty much every CEO or leader I've ever worked with at least feels the temptation. Like they get different levels of skill holding themselves back from that. Any advice there? You stick with the rocks. You said run them for a couple months, but is it you need to run these for 90 days?
Yeah. You, in the first go, you shoot for 90. In our process, it can be between 60 and 90. It typically is 60 or 75 days in the actual proven process of EOS, just to get the first round through. Because in the first round, we realize, hey, maybe I should have built goals that were a 90-day objective that was a little bit more concisely. We call it writing them smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely.
Mm-hmm.
So you learn things every cycle, but you don't change or edit the rock in the period that you work on it. You can work on large objectives. You can get ready for the next quarter, but you really want to force the ability to predict what those objectives are, and get that practice of every 90 days predicting the next 90 days, because it will take a few cycles. It takes a few times to get it right.
100%. And we see that with any framework. It's just that frequently the frameworks and operating systems don't always build that learning curve in, I find. So I really like that idea of let's be intentional about this.
Yeah.
Let's get the first ones under our belt. So the second of the things that came up is the issue solving track. That's another area where I see people, I won't say stumble, but I feel like frequently it takes time to develop a crisp practice there. What are the things people need to know about that issue solving track and how to use it effectively in a level 10?
I want to give you some tidbits on that. I want to give you some tips on the issue solving track, but I want to go back if I can.
Okay.
To answer your question about rocks, I want to tell you about getting that list down and prioritizing. One of the things that we learn with a leadership team is that there are folks on the team who have different ways of solving problems. There are the integrators who are really good at having tough conversations, and they really orchestrate the major functions of the organization. And there's the visionaries who drive culture and really are good with the big relationships. I know you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. Visionary versus integrator. What I challenge the self-implementer with is asking, which one are you? And which way does the rest of your team lean? When you know, and you can get into more depth about how people solve problems and what their instinctual solving strengths. I've got my Colby score behind me that tells you a little bit about that. But even if you just look visionary and integrator, the visionary, when they're looking at that list of 30 things that we got to get down to 3 to 7, the question they need to keep asking is, what's great for the bigger picture? What's for the greater good of the organization? What must we do in the next 90 days? When you ask a visionary that question, the list will get smaller, because visionaries are really good at answering that question when they're asked. When they're asked to focus, they're good at that bigger picture. The integrator, however, you got to ask them the question, hey, if we don't get this down in size, are we ever going to get off this topic? Because the integrator wants the ships to arrive, things to be done on time. So you got to ask them the question. They're often just as guilty as adding all the things. You've just got to say to them, hey, we need to simplify and we need to decide. If we don't decide, this whole thing won't move ahead. So can you please prioritize in order for us to decide on the highest priorities? When you frame the language like that around that for the visionary and integrator respectively that I mentioned, it helps them get that list down. And that's just a tip for getting that list down. There's other things you can do. I'm just putting that out there because I really think the way you described, hey, a self-implementing company, maybe they don't have the funds or don't believe it would, for whatever reason, they're self-implementing. Those folks in that situation, I don't want them to get stuck there. I don't want them to get stuck or say, let's do 9. I know EOS says 3 to 7, but I'm going to do 9. And frankly, if I was coaching them, I'd say, I won't die on that hill. If you say 9, I'll be like, let's watch, see what happens. I'll tell you what happens. They won't. You want to get 80% of them done or better. Half of them will be done. Or if they got them all done, they'll be like, those were pretty weak. Those were like, I did it in a week. It took me a week or 2 to get that done. That was more like a to-do and not a 13-week objective.
What you said, that call to action to the visionary and the integrator to decide, it immediately gives the team a way to push back constructively. They're not calling the visionary, the integrator out. They're just saying, this is what we need from you, which is what great teams do. If you're on the basketball court or anywhere else, it's the level of communication is high. It's crisp, it's concise. And I really like that call to action because it is actually a way that the teams can lift their leaders up. We need this from you. We need it now. And being able to say that can be very difficult for a lot of people. And since that's such a simple thing to say, we need a decision here. I think that's
why who's who the visionaries are, who the integrators are. You can ask that question of the integrators. Mm-hmm. You can say, hey, look, let's simplify, and that's hard for them to them. Simplify can sometimes be difficult for an integrator, but if you say, hey, can we please prioritize these tasks? That would simplify things. And can we decide? An integrator can drive for a decision. They drive discipline and accountability. They naturally do it. But you can't ask the visionary to do that. Typically, that's harder for them to get into the conflict, or it's not their natural state to get in the weeds even. They're looking at this list and they're just like, what a mess. But if you say to them, what is for the greater good? What are we doing for the greater good of the organization? They'll be like, oh, it's obvious. It's those 4 things we needed. And everybody's, thank you. We couldn't see. All we saw was a list of 25 things. So it is according to who they are that you need to get into that.
It's great to hear that insight, because I can think of so many situations I've been in, even when I was coming up, where these would have been great tools to have. You have a problem.
If everybody's an integrator, you should talk to someone. If your whole team is neither visionary nor integrator, you should talk to someone. Like,
What's interesting though, I'm thinking like, so a team of all visionaries, the only way that works is it's almost purely sales. I think maybe. And then integrators though, a team of all integrators I have seen, because I come from technical and management
software.
consulting backgrounds,
Yeah.
and those are armies of integrators basically. Super interesting. I would like to make sure we get to this IDS and what
Oh
that
yeah.
issue solving track in the level 10. We know level 10, you're going to look at your scorecard, you're going to look at your traction component, you're going to drop down to the issues list, any things that are not on track. You're going to look at any customer people headlines and what got done since last week. And then the bulk of the meeting is really solving issues together, which I love, because a business that can solve issues and challenges is a healthy business indeed. Can you talk to us a little bit about what goes into that? What should folks self-implementing EOS know about that really critical portion of the level 10?
Just like setting rocks, this is something that takes practice.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue solving track and IDS is really about strengthening a muscle with your leadership team and then eventually the entire company, and getting everybody capable, knocking out issues as quick as they arise. But for you to do that, you have to get past the habits we learn out in the wild, like in how we all solve problems, and create what I call a reactive atmosphere. Because the issues list is a very deliberate way to predict that we've actually solved an issue and that we're going to solve it for good so we don't see it again. When Gino Wickman built EOS, he pulled all the levers, he tried everything. He noticed that it was actually 5% of companies are not frustrated and the other 95% are. And he just was obsessed with, why are these guys frustrated? So I bring this up because solving issues is why they're frustrated. When the typical company solves issues, the issue comes back later. The same issue comes back and it just bothers them. It just gets them frustrated. They're like, we can talk about this, but if we don't get past it, we're always going to be hitting the ceiling. So that's why they're frustrated. So a lot of frustrations are solved by using this issue solving track properly. And here's what you do to solve the issue and find new issues to solve. We did a little study and we found that when you put leaders in a room, rarely do they identify the root cause of an issue. They discuss, they beat each other up, they tire each other out, and then rarely do they solve. So they create this little negative feedback loop that I'm not going to solve this and we can't solve this. They get all negative about solving issues. So they get into silos. They do all sorts of things. We don't need to list the behaviors that happen when people resent talking about tough topics, right? It's a human thing. So that's why we built the issue solving track that starts with identifying what the root cause of that issue is. So what this means, and this is the part to answer your question, because it really is built, the I in IDS is really where this all happens. So when you've identified in the level 10 meeting, the 3 most important issues for the week by just asking the team, hey, what do we need to work on? And they just yell out the number, not the topic, because we just got to go fast. What are the 3 most things? You circle the 3, you start working on them in the order they were said. And when whatever's listed, whatever on that issues list, you have to reframe your mind, that is not an issue. That is just a symptom. And that's the beginning of realizing that you need to get to the root of something in order to knock it out for good. That's why a lot of issue discussions in a non-EOS company are circular, and you end up seeing the same issue come up over and over again because you're not practiced and focused at getting to the root. So you're looking at that issue or that issue list item and you know that it's a symptom. So what you do is you dig to get to the root cause, meaning the group is challenging each other to describe the root of that issue. The first person says, hey, it's my issue. Here's what it looks like when it's solved. And the next person says, it could be because of this that we have this issue. Somebody else challenges, takes it a level deeper, says, no, I think that's because of this. Maybe that's because of this. Once you get to that root, then discussion is brief. If it becomes repetitive, we consider that politicking. We don't do that. And then you just easily get to a solve, which is usually a to-do or a change in what you're doing, or maybe a message that needs to go out to everybody. That's IDS, identify, discuss, and solve. But it really starts with a strong commitment by the team to get to the root. And that means that if you're not getting to the root, you're talking in circles, somebody needs to say, we're not going deep enough. I've heard of companies with Nerf guns. It's if you're tangenting and we're just talking about the surface, or it's another perspective of the same problem, the Nerf gun goes off and somebody's going to get shot. You can do all sorts of things to train the team to get to the root, but that's doing the idea as well.
I like the Nerf gun, and I like the other one I've seen used with great efficacy is squirt guns. They can be good. Do you put those discussions on the clock? Or is it just up to the integrator to decide, have we discussed this fully?
It's totally up to the integrator. I would never put a clock in there. You could have a list of issues, and on any given day, you decided to talk about the biggest, hardest issue, and you didn't even solve it. You got to 80%. That was a great meeting. Everybody would say, we went further on that than we ever have, and we're almost there. So it's not about the number of issues you solve or the time it takes to solve an issue. It's really about the quality and making sure that everybody's seeing that we're getting deeper to the solve. That said, we have two types of issues, long-term and short-term. The ones you were working with weekly, those are short-term issues. You have a chance, you have a fighting chance of solving those on any given week, or at least moving the ball. Long-term issues are ones that you need to be solved in the year or maybe in a future year, but we're going to talk about those in a quarterly meeting. So if you got an issue that you feel is we may never get there, put it onto your long-term issues list and tackle it aggressively when you do your quarterly meeting.
The other question I get a lot is KPIs, our scorecard. What are the things we need to add to the scorecard? I know on the Vision Traction Organizer, we typically see revenue, we typically see profit. Are there some standard KPIs from an EOS perspective you should always have at the top of that list, or is it really dependent on the type of company and industry?
I would call them high-level guidelines that I would recommend that are we live in an age of data, and there's many approaches to this. So you have to consider that if you're using EOS to help you get there, you want to know what is right with EOS to see that it works before you dismiss it or modify it. Because if you're not really doing EOS, you won't get the results that an EOS company gets. And this is a common place for folks to invent their own thing and not get the results and say, I'm not getting it, but you really have to do some certain things. So I'll give you one of them is you really want your weekly measurable. We call them measurables and not KPIs. We want your weekly measurable to be an activity-based or a leading indicator type measurement and not a lagging. Those lagging things that take a lot of calculation or a lot of baking, I guess you could say, those things, they're useful, but man, they're way more useful in a monthly or quarterly report. So when you look at and consider things, if you could wait a few weeks or even a couple months to see the result, put that in that report. And that's not necessarily a part of EOS, it's just part of running a company. You should always have quarterly and monthly reports to see the bigger picture. But what you want your weekly scorecard measurables to be are 5 to 15 numbers that give you a true pulse on the business, tell you when things are off, tell you when things are on and working well. But these are the activities that give you, that help you predict that your monthly KPIs or whatever you're measuring monthly and quarterly, that those are going to be great. So if let's say it's a sales number, if you're tracking revenue on your quarter and we need $3 million for the quarter, what are the biggest things that we know? What activities do we know we must do every week to get those revenue? For some company, it might be follow-up emails sent or times I picked up the phone. I'm just using it as an example. If those things if your quarterly was off and you looked in hindsight and you IDS'd it and you said, we weren't on the phone, we didn't do our follow-ups, that's a trigger. That should be something that you track every week as an activity that will get you the next great quarter. So activity-based measurables, 5 to 15 of them. And as far as like inventing, what should they be? What could they be? The biggest guideline I'll give, and really it is contextual to the organization. Different industries need different measurables. And for some industries, what looks like a lagging for indicator for one is actually a leading for another. So there's no black and white on this. It matters. And this is why it's helpful to have a coach to help you see that sometimes. But I will tell you one piece of advice that I've had just from practice. You look at the three major functions of a healthy entrepreneurial organization, and that is a sales and marketing function, an operations function, and a finance function. Really, all three need to be strong. If one of those are weak, something starts breaking. And what one company calls operations is different from another. What one calls sales and marketing is different from another. What one calls finance could be completely structured and different, but it doesn't matter what you call it. They all thriving entrepreneurial organizations have those three. With that assumption made, you know that you need measurables that represent all three of those. If you just have one, if it's all leaning one way, then I just ask you, why are you allowing the other two to be weak or any of them to be weak?
That's a great way to phrase that question. I love that. I just want to call that out. Why are you allowing that one to be weak?
Yeah. Your accountability chart can help you see that if you've built out your accountability chart the right way. But you really have to, that accountability chart it'll tell you all the problems in the organization can come down to the accountability chart. So getting that built properly, it helps you in so many ways. And I'm just bringing it back to Scorecard, because your accountability chart has those three major functions. And if you have strength in those three functions, then you have strength on your scorecard and you're ultimately strength in your business.
I like that. Is there anything top of mind for you want to add?
We talked a little bit about core values, didn't we?
You're not gonna go hire and fire tomorrow based on core values you've written today. It's better to get in there, get your rocks set, get your weekly cadence moving with the level 10s, and then come back and think
decide,
about those.
Yeah, then build the axe that you might have. Don't build the axe on the first day. Build the axe. And the axe is a good thing. It also cuts down the trees to feed the stove or whatever. So you need the axe. But yeah, core values, I wouldn't look at them as the axe. That's a bad. But I would use the core values to with confidence hire and fire, and make sure that everything on that accountability chart and all those numbers that are coming in from Scorecard are accurate. And those discussions you're having in your IDS are like valuable, that people in the meeting are actually challenging each other to get to the root. So you got to make sure you have people who match your values, or they're not, if they don't feel safe that they can do that, because the core values aren't aligned, you're never going to get anywhere. It's just going to be, there might be one bulldozer in the room, or who knows, but this is how it all comes together.
Yeah. The thing I love about great actionable core values is you get that healthy tension. People will push back on you, and people gain the courage to push back on their leader, their boss, and whomever, because they say, listen, if this is important to us, then we need to do X. I feel like that's almost the sign of a healthy team. If you're not getting that, maybe everybody's not comfortable.
It's true. I used to have a core value of being a past athlete. I'm like, if you've been an athlete, then you understand growth, and you understand improvement and good pain and bad pain, and you understand. And it was just me trying to use what tools I had and what my background was. And then I realized it's deeper than that, because I've got some guys who are clearly not athletes, but they're great. They belong here and they're great performers. So that exploration of why you would hire or fire, take it to hire and fire, getting those core values, it's taken me decades to understand why it works or how it works. Mm-hmm. But I will say, when you figure that part out, all of this is so much more fun. So it's worth the work of doing your rocks and taking a couple hits, running those level 10 meetings, making sure they're done. They start on time, end on time, and they're at the same time of the week every week, and that you run that agenda. doing all that work really does pay off when you start asking those questions and executing. And that's what EOS is all about.